There is a strange paradox at the heart of modern American life. By almost every objective metric, the physical world has become safer for young people than it was 50 years ago. Violent crime rates have plummeted since the 1970s and 80s. Cars are engineering marvels of safety. We have applications on our phones that track the location of our loved ones within a few feet. We have successfully eliminated so many of the physical dangers that haunted previous generations. And yet, if you look at the internal landscape of the modern teenager, the picture is not one of safety, but of crisis. Rates of anxiety, depression, and fragility among young people have skyrocketed to levels that would have been inconceivable half a century ago. We have traded broken bones for broken spirits. We have traded the physical risks of the outside world for the psychological risks of a digital one. To understand why this is happening, we need to look back, not with the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, but to analyze the 1970s as a unique psychological environment. We need to look at the teenager of that decade, not as a historical figure, but as a case study in human psychology. When we examine the way they lived, we begin to see that the hardships and the boredom and the lack of supervision were not flaws in the system, they were features. They were the very structural elements that built a specific kind of mind, a mind capable of solitude, a mind that understood consequence, a mind that was, by definition, anti-fragile. Let us begin by talking about the architecture of time. If you were 15 years old in 1975, your life was defined by vast, empty spaces. I am talking about the time between school ending and dinner starting, the time spent sitting in the back of a station wagon on a long road trip, the time spent waiting for a friend to show up at a meeting spot. In the modern world, we view these moments of waiting as errors. We view boredom as a disease that must be cured immediately. If a modern teenager feels even 3 seconds of boredom, they reflexively reach for a smartphone. The dopamine loop is instant. The silence is killed before it can even breathe. But in the 1970s, that silence was unavoidable. There was no internet. There were only 3 television channels, and often nothing was on. You could not text a friend to alleviate the loneliness. You simply had to exist in the void. Neuroscience has a name for what happens to the human brain when it is not focused on a specific external task. It is called the default mode network. For a long time, scientists thought that when we were doing nothing, our brains were dormant, but they discovered the exact opposite. When you're staring at a ceiling, or walking alone through a neighborhood, or simply sitting in a room with your thoughts, your brain enters a state of hyperconnectivity. This is where memory consolidation happens. This is where the self reflects on the self. This is where you construct your autobiography. The teenagers of the 1970s spent hours every day in this default mode network. They were not consuming content, they were synthesizing their own identity. By killing boredom with technology, we have inadvertently severed the connection to this vital mental state. We have raised a generation that has never been forced to be alone with their own thoughts. And if you cannot be alone with your thoughts, you cannot truly know who you are. Consider the act of listening to music. This seems like a trivial example, but it perfectly illustrates the shift in our cognitive training. Today, music is fluid. It is an infinite stream. If the first 10 seconds of a song do not hook you, you skip it. You have access to 30 million songs in your pocket. It is a culture of abundance and zero friction. Now contrast that with the experience of the 1970s teenager. Buying an album was a significant financial commitment. You worked at a gas station or mowed lawns to earn the money required to buy a vinyl record. When you brought that record home, the ritual was physical and demanding. You had to take the disc out of the sleeve, you had to clean it, you had to place the needle on the groove with surgical precision. And once the music started, you sat there. You did not have a remote control. Skipping a song required physical effort and the risk of scratching your precious investment. So you listened. You listened to the songs you liked, but you also listened to the deep cuts, the strange experimental tracks, the slow ballads that required patience. You sat on the floor holding the album cover, reading the liner notes, studying the lyrics. You gave the artist 40 minutes of your undivided attention. This was not just entertainment, this was a cognitive workout. It was training the brain to focus on one thing for an extended period. It was training the mind to appreciate delayed gratification. It taught you that understanding something complex takes time and stillness. Today, we call this mindfulness, and we pay money for applications to teach it to us. Back then, it was just called listening to a record. This fundamental difference in how we consume the world extends to every aspect of the 1970s experience. It was a world of high friction. If you wanted to see a movie, you had to look up the showtimes in the newspaper, drive to the theater, and hope it was not sold out. If you wanted to talk to a girl, you had to brave the social terror of calling her family landline, knowing her father might answer the phone. Every desire had a barrier. Every reward required an investment of effort and courage. This friction is what psychologists call eustress, or beneficial stress. It is the resistance that strengthens the psychological immune system. When we removed all the friction from modern life, when we made everything instant and on demand, we thought we were making life better. We thought we were liberating young people. But in reality, we were atrophying their ability to tolerate discomfort. We created a world that is so convenient it has become psychologically debilitating. The teenager of the 1970s was not tougher by genetics. They were tougher because their environment demanded it. They were forced to navigate a world that was indifferent to their boredom and unresponsive to their immediate demands. And in that indifference, they found a strange kind of freedom. This brings us to the concept of privacy and the right to be forgotten. In the digital age, we live in what sociologists call a panopticon. This is a concept where the subjects are aware that they could be watched at any moment. Between social media, location tracking, and the permanent record of the internet, modern teenagers are performing for an audience from the moment they wake up until the moment they sleep. The 1970s teenager offered something that is now the ultimate luxury: true anonymity. When a teenager walked out the front door in 1976, they vanished. They fell off the radar. There was no way to reach them. There was no digital leash. For 5 or 6 hours, they were the captains of their own destiny. This lack of surveillance created a testing ground for character. It allowed them to make mistakes that did not define their entire lives. If you did something stupid at a party in 1978, it might be the subject of gossip on Monday morning, but it was not recorded in high-definition video and uploaded to a global server to live forever. You could be an idiot, you could be messy, you could fail, and then you could recover. This freedom to fail in private is essential for human development. It allows you to experiment with different versions of yourself. It allows you to take risks. Today, the cost of social failure is astronomically high.
One wrong sentence, one bad photo can destroy a reputation instantly. Is it any wonder that modern teenagers are anxious? They are living under the pressure of a 24-hour broadcast, constantly curating their lives to avoid cancellation or ridicule. The 1970s teenager lived in the wild, but at least they were not living on a stage.